Okay, let's dig into this. Welcome to the deep dive.
Hey there.
So, you know the drill. We grab a bunch of source material, could be articles, reports, videos, whatever, and we try to pull out the really important stuff so you can get up to speed quickly.
And today we're looking at some material focusing on Brazil, specifically concerns bubbling up around freedom of speech and, well, what the government's perceived to be doing.
Yeah, we've got this particular video, some analysis surrounding it, and it paints a pretty stark picture.
It definitely presents a strong viewpoint on current events there.
Right. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to unpack the key arguments being made in this specific material. We want to understand the examples it uses, the evidence it presents.
And just see what insights we can get from its perspective, right,
Yeah.
on the situation it's describing.
Exactly. And just a heads up for you listening, the views in these sources, they're quite pointed, maybe even challenging for some.
Yeah, this source material really doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah.
It kicks off with a huge claim that Brazil is, and this is a quote, wide open to dictatorship.
Yeah.
Dictatorship is wide open in this country.
Wow. Okay. That's a massive statement right there. How does the source material even begin to, back that up?
Well, it tries to ground that claim in specific recent events and statements. It really focuses on actions from both the president's office, the executive, and the courts, the judiciary.
Okay, let's break that down. Maybe start with the executive. What does the source say about President Lula's side of things?
So according to the material we looked at, there's a big focus on what it calls Lula's stated intentions, particularly this alleged desire he has to regulate everything.
Regulate everything. That sounds broad.
It does. And the source zooms in specifically on regulating social media. That seems to be a key point.
And I saw something in the source here that really jumped out at me. It mentions Lula confirming a representative from China is coming to Brazil to talk about digital platform laws.
That's right. And the source really flags that.
Why? What's the concern there, according to the source?
Well, the analysis draws a pretty direct line. It suggests that getting advice on legislation from China, a country known for, very tight internet controls.
Right, the Great Firewall and all that.
Exactly. So the source argues this could signal a move towards maybe adopting a similar kind of censorship model in Brazil. That connection is seen as deeply worrying in the material.
Okay, so it's not just that they want to regulate, but who they're reportedly talking to about how to regulate. That's the red flag for the source.
Precisely. And the material also includes quotes it attributes to Lula, basically justifying this push, saying it's needed to stop filth and indecency online.
Filth and indecency.
Yeah, and he reportedly even said something like he's taking away the freedom to tell filth. The source material is, let's just say, highly critical of that whole line of reasoning, sees it as a direct attack on free expression.
Okay. And the source also mentioned, I think, that Lula said this regulation could happen either through Congress or the Supreme Court, the STF.
Yeah, yes, and that mention of the STF, the Supreme Court, is actually a key transition in the source material. It then shifts a lot of focus onto the judiciary, specifically onto one judge, STF Minister Alexandre de Moraes. And the source levels another really strong accusation here.
Which is?
That this minister is acting in a dictatorial manner.
Another very serious claim from this source. What specifics does it offer? What examples does it point to for that accusation?
So the main example the source gives is the suspension of social media accounts belonging to a congresswoman, Carla Zambelli.
Okay, suspending a politician's account. That happens elsewhere sometimes, right? Content moderation disputes.
True, but the source highlights something really striking about this order. It apparently didn't just target her.
Oh.
The order, as the source describes it, also mandated suspending the accounts of, wait for it, her son and her mother.
Her son and her mother.
Yeah.
Their personal accounts. Just because they're related to her.
That's what the source claims happened. And it interprets that as, well, pretty extreme.
I can imagine. How does the source frame that action legally or ethically?
It calls the action illegal, specifically citing Brazil's own internet law, the Marco Civil Day Internet. And the analysis makes a really chilling comparison.
What's the comparison?
It likens it to practices you might see in North Korea, where entire families can be punished for what one person does. Collective punishment, basically.
Wow. Comparing judicial actions in Brazil to North Korea. That's intense.
It is. And the source also mentions a hefty fine attached, right?
Yeah, I saw that. Something like $100,000 a day for not complying.
That's right. About 20,000 US dollars per day for not taking down those family accounts, along with hers.
So the source uses these kinds of specific actions, like the family account suspensions, as key evidence for its argument about judicial overreach and this drift towards authoritarianism it perceives.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. It brings up other cases, too.
Like what else does the source highlight regarding free speech concerns?
Well, there's the case of a comedian, Leo Lins. The source reports he was sentenced to prison.
Prison for comedy.
For telling jokes, specifically. The sentence mentioned in the source is over 8 years and 3 months.
8 years.
That's the claim. And the source frames this, obviously, as a just, blatant, severe attack on freedom of speech.
8 years for jokes. I mean, if that's accurate as reported, it definitely fits the source's narrative about, shrinking space for expression. Anything else?
Yeah, the source also talks quite a bit about the Supreme Court's fake news inquiry, the STF's inquiry.
Okay, what about it?
The source points out it's been running for 6 years now. 6 years. And apparently there's still no clear legal definition within the inquiry of what constitutes fake news.
6 years and no definition. So what does the source suggest the purpose is then?
It portrays it less as a real legal process and more as a political tool, a tool used for, quote, enormous impact and subsequent control over politics.
So the source thinks it's more about political leverage than actually fighting disinformation.
That's the argument it makes, yes. And it ties back, chillingly, to the Zambelli case again.
How so?
The source mentions finding reference elsewhere to a comment someone supposedly made, suggesting they should arrest Carla Zambelli's mother.
Arrest the mother, just because of her daughter.
Yeah. The source points to this as possible, really disturbing evidence that maybe some public sentiment is actually okay with these kinds of, authoritarian-style measures it's describing.
Yeah, that's a tough one to hear. So it feels like the source is weaving together these different threads, executive actions, judicial orders, even public comments to build this overall picture.
Definitely. And it also touches on the tension between the judiciary and the legislature, the Congress.
Ah, okay. What's the issue there, according to the source?
It brings up concerns voiced by a journalist, William Wack. He apparently noted the STF's, the Supreme Court, has basically said it will step in and legislate on social media itself if Congress doesn't act, or doesn't act in a way the court approves of.
So the court potentially making laws, isn't that Congress's job?
Well, yeah. That's the fundamental tension the source highlights. This potential blurring of lines. Legislature makes laws, judiciary interprets them. That's the traditional separation.
But the source suggests the STF might be crossing that line.
It argues that there's already existing legislation, like that Marco Civil, the internet law we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It provides a framework.
Right.
But the source suggests maybe the STF wants different laws. Laws potentially tailored more to its own interests or agenda from the source's perspective, not just interpreting what Congress passed.
Okay, so it sounds like the source sees a real disconnect then between the kind of language politicians might use and the actual actions being taken.
Absolutely. That's a core theme in the material.
Yeah.
It notes President Lula uses words like democratic, respect, talks about not achincalamento.
What does that mean, roughly?
Sort of ridiculing, belittling people. So he uses this language of respect.
But the source contrasts that with
the specific actions it's been detailing. Seeking advice from China, which it frames as authoritarian. The whole situation with Zambelli's family accounts. The Leo Lins sentencing.
Right. The actions seem, in the source's view, to contradict the rhetoric.
Exactly. And so the source essentially dismisses the official reasons given for regulation, things like saving democracy or protecting kids online.
Dismisses them as what?
Potentially as a smokescreen. That's the word he uses. A smokescreen possibly hiding a bigger agenda focused on censorship and control. Maybe, again, leaning towards that Chinese model mentioned earlier.
So the overall feeling from the source material is pretty clear then.
Yeah, it conveys this strong sense that the space to disagree, to speak freely, even to tell jokes, is actively getting smaller in Brazil, based on all these factors it presents.
Okay, so just to quickly summarize the key concerns laid out in the source material we dove into. You've got this central, stark claim about a drift towards authoritarianism.
Backed up by examples of perceived overreach from President Lula's administration regarding regulation, especially involving China.
And specific judicial actions by the STF, particularly Minister de Moraes, like the Zambelli family account suspensions, and the lengthy sentence for the comedian Leo Lins.
Plus concerns about the judiciary potentially overstepping into legislative roles, and the ongoing, vaguely defined fake news inquiry.
Right. And looking at this material, it really is an example, isn't it, of how crucial it is to understand the specifics, the claims, and the evidence presented in source material, even if it's about another country.
Absolutely. It shows why you need to look beyond just the headlines,
Yeah.
to see the details, the specific examples cited, and the particular interpretation being offered by the source you're looking at, especially in such a complex information landscape.
Definitely. And it leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about. Here's a question maybe to mull over, based on what this source material suggests. When a source highlights government actions and stated goals that appear to be completely at odds, how do you begin to evaluate what might really be happening?